Reverend Jonathan Aitken, a Church of England priest and former Conservative cabinet minister who served time in prison in 1999 before becoming a lead prison reform campaigner, and Andrew Neilson, Director of Campaigns at Howard League for Penal Reform, a charity which advocated for less crime, safer communities and fewer people in prison. A very good morning to you both. Thanks for joining us. Andrew, I'll come to you first in terms of the scale of this early release issue and people returning to prison, whether it's all linked and how much of a problem it is.
It's definitely a link to the early release scheme. It's releasing more people and we are seeing them often, unfortunately, being returned to custody, sometimes within days. And we have seen steep increases in the use of recall across the piece, particularly in the short-sentenced prison population, a group of people that couldn't have been recalled to custody about a decade or so ago. Legislation was introduced by the last government that allowed that to happen. We've also, I think, seen, as we've just heard in the report, that most of these recalls are not actually to do with further offences. They're to do with administrative reasons, to do with the management of the sentence. About a quarter, for example, are to do effectively with people being released to homelessness, so no residence. And we know as a charity from our own conversations with our members in prison that common sense doesn't always prevail in these decisions. So just to give you two very quick examples, a case of a man whose probation appointment was at 2 p.m. He missed that appointment. He missed it because he hadn't been released from prison. He wasn't released until later that afternoon, and yet he was recalled. Another case of a man who was to be fitted with a tag. Staff turned up at the wrong address. He realised something was wrong, so he presented himself at his local police station. But again, he was recalled. And I think this is a symptom of what is clearly an overburdened, very overstretched service, where, unfortunately, the default response, as Martin Jones was hinting at as the Chief Inspector, is to recall rather than investigate these kind of cases.
I mean, Jonathan, listening to Andrew's comments there, it sounds like it's too simple to try and conclude that many prisoners being recalled is down to the fact that they may have been released too early in the first place.
Well, we're talking here about a growing crisis in the prison service and the probation service. Everybody knows that prisons are bursting at the seams. What they perhaps don't know is that of our 80,000 or so prisoners, 12,500 are prisoners who've been recalled. And when I, as a prison chaplain, go down the wings, I keep on meeting time and time again people who say, I've just been recalled. And then I say, why have you been recalled? And the reasons are some of those that Andrew just mentioned. They're not because they've offended. There's a very small number of those who have. But probably over 10,000 of those new prisoners have served their sentences. They've been recalled because of administrative failures, sometimes of their own. They've failed to turn up for appointments. I met a young man last week who said he'd got slightly irritated by something a probation officer was saying, and he sucked his teeth. And she said, that's your attitude, I'm recalling you. And I'm afraid the law, and it isn't the law, it's the administration, is as long as a probation officer's foot. And these probation officers are heavily overworked. And they overreact by recalling much, much too often. I'm so glad the Chief Inspector of Probation is now tackling it, and people like you in the Times newspaper are tackling the subject, which is long overdue, and it's causing a crisis.
So what's needed to change, Jonathan, in your thing? There needs to be a change in guidance for probation officers or a change in the law?
Well, we could, for a start, go back to where we were just 10 years ago, and the probation officers were not required to supervise people who just come out after a sentence of under a year. We could reduce their workload. Probation officers look after 250,000 cases a year, supervision. They can't do it. Some of them are carrying workloads of 70, 80 cases. And so the first thing is to take the pressure off and then to say no one should be recalled and lose their liberty again unless they've done something pretty serious. I'm not against recalling at all for somebody who's reoffended or is violent or something like that. But for people who are just unpunctual or annoyed a probation officer, some minor administrative, that's wrong and it's bad for the system.
Darlings, discover my new fragrance collection of emotions. How do you want to feel today? Let me introduce you to the...
In prisons, rather than being a big problem, is it almost an opportunity to reduce the overcrowding?
I think it is an opportunity, and the government should absolutely grasp the nettle and take that opportunity. So as Jonathan said, we do need to see investment in the community. We need to see investment in probation so that staff have the time and space to investigate these cases properly and challenge whether recall is appropriate. But the government can do more itself directly. We can go back to where we were 10 years ago so that people on short sentences can't be recalled. They're spending only a short time in custody. Very little positive can be done with them. Then putting them under the shadow of potential recall is really just setting them up to fail. And we can see, I think, measures taken to dramatically reduce the use of administrative recall. I was reading the case of a man who had been out of prison for 20 years and was recalled for missing one probation appointment. That is simply not a standard that I think any of us would like to be held to in terms of timeliness and appointments, let alone when that's the consequence.
Andrew, to what extent, I mean, clearly we've all been covering the overcrowding issue and the prison crisis over the last year or so, which has taken a long time to brew to get to this point. To what extent is solving it by increasing places in prisons, of 80,000 prisoners or so now? Should we be increasing capacity significantly?
Well, the government is spending money on building new prisons, and that is perhaps understandable when they are running out of cells, and they certainly over the summer last year, that's what they were facing. Sadly, I don't think spending billions of pounds on new prisons is the answer, particularly actually because of some of the issues we've just discussed. I think more money needs to be spent on the probation service in the community so that it can do the job it needs to do. Prisons have taken the lion's share of funding in criminal justice for too long, but ultimately it is the probation service that is the ultimate guarantor of public safety, because crime happens in the community and probation works in the community.
Jonathan, your take on that in terms of more prisons or not?
Well, we can build our way out of prison crisis very slowly and expensively. I wish you were the prison minister, because you just said a phrase which should absolutely be on every minister's desk. This probation service recall crisis could be turned from a problem into an opportunity. It's very easy, with a few strokes of a ministerial pen and possibly a small regulation change, to get the number of prisoners being recalled way, way down. And that would in itself ease the overcrowding crisis very substantially.
Well, I must say I'm pleased I'm not the prison minister, I have to say. Jonathan, whilst we've got you, a quick question, if I may, in terms of the Church of England's synod. What are your key takeaways, and do you think enough is being done in the immediate term to tackle the crisis, I guess, that it faces?